I need to be clear about this from the beginning. What stood at the end of my street was never just a haunted house. It was a place where something had been allowed to stay and never asked to leave. The house first appeared in records after a tragedy no one remembers clearly. A death marked as an accident. A funeral held quietly. And then silence, no investigation. No follow-up. No explanation that ever made sense. When I searched deeper, I found references to a religious gathering that never should have happened there. Not a church service, not a prayer. Something distorted, words spoken in the wrong order, meant to invite rather than ask. Locals avoided details. But one phrase kept resurfacing in old notes and whispered conversations. The house answered back. No one explained what question had been asked or who had been listening. The family who lived there afterward didn't last long. They reported changes, first dreams that weren't theirs. Thoughts arriving fully formed, like something else was thinking through them while they slept. By the time they left, neighbors said the house felt different, heavier. Not angry, but aware. As if something inside had learned what it needed, and no longer required permission. That was the moment the house stopped being a location and became a presence. It didn't just hold something. It became the way that things stayed connected to this street. And if something had been invited once, then the question that followed me was unavoidable. What happens when it decides to answer again? The rumors didn't describe noises. They described responses. People said the house didn't just make sounds, it replied. If someone whispered a prayer near it, the words came back altered, spoken in a voice that didn't belong to any living person. One man told me the house repeated his mother's prayers, but backward. Every word precise, every pause correct. He recognized the cadence instantly. His mother had been dead for 6 years when the house spoke. Others spoke about the names. Always names spoken softly after midnight, never shouted, never urgent. Just enough to make you stop walking and listen. The terrifying part was that the voice always sounded familiar to ignore. A woman who lived nearby claimed the house began calling her son's name weeks before he disappeared. When police questioned her, they wrote it off as grief. But the calls didn't stop after he was gone. The rumors all carried the same warning: never answer. People said the moment you spoke back, the house learned something about you. Your voice, your rhythm. The way you hesitated before saying your own name. A former resident admitted he did answer once. He said the house went silent afterward. No lights, no sounds. Just a feeling that something had settled into place, like a lock clicking shut. After that night, his behavior changed. He stopped sleeping. He stopped praying. He said whenever he closed his eyes, he saw the house's doorway and something standing just behind it, waiting for him to speak again. Listening to these stories, I realized the rumors weren't meant to scare people away. They were evidence, proof that the house didn't hunt randomly. It listened, it learned, and it chose who to answer. The witnesses I spoke to didn't describe a ghost. They described something that noticed them back. Every one of them used the same phrase before correcting themselves, as if the words slipped out against their will. The woman across the street said she once saw a figure standing in the upstairs hallway. It didn't walk, it didn't sway. It simply leaned forward, slowly, until its head should not have been able to bend that way. She said the worst part wasn't the shape, it was the stillness. It stood there for nearly an hour, never blinking, never shifting, as if it was waiting to be acknowledged. Another witness was a former resident who slept in the basement. He told me something used to stand at the top of the stairs at night, just out of sight, breathing slowly, too slowly for a human body. He said whenever he looked directly at the stairs, the breathing stopped. But the moment he looked away, it resumed, closer each time, heavier, as if testing how long he could endure it. A teenage witness described seeing the thing move, not walking, falling, limbs bending inward, joints collapsing the wrong way, until it slipped through a doorway too narrow for a human body. That witness stopped speaking for weeks afterward. When he finally did, he said the thing wasn't trying to hide. It was learning how to move correctly, using the house as practice. What connected all their stories wasn't fear. It was recognition. Each witness felt certain the thing knew exactly who they were and that seeing it had changed something permanent inside them. By the time I finished these interviews, I understood something chilling. The house didn't reveal what lived inside by accident. It showed itself when it decided someone was ready to see. At first, people believed whatever lived in the house was bound to it. That belief didn't survive long. Witnesses described sensations days after leaving the street, like something had memorized them and followed quietly behind. One former resident told me the sounds came first. Slow footsteps in his new apartment, always pacing the same distance as the hallway in the old house, always stopping outside his bedroom door. He said the worst nights were when nothing happened at all. No sound, no movement. Just the certainty that if he opened his eyes, he would see the same doorway from the house waiting for him. Another witness claimed the presence attached itself to her child. The boy began speaking to someone she couldn't see, repeating phrases she later recognized as fragments of reversed prayers. When she tried to stop him, the child screamed, not in fear, but in anger. He told her she wasn't supposed to listen, that it could hear her thinking. Pets reacted next. Dogs refused to enter rooms. Cats stared at empty corners for hours. One family said their dog growled at a wall where the front door of the house should have been. I began hearing the same pattern from everyone. It didn't attack, it integrated. It inserted itself into routines, thoughts, and sleep until people couldn't remember when it had started. That was when a possibility became impossible to ignore. The house wasn't the source, it was the anchor. And whatever lived there no longer needed it once a connection was made. If that was true, then the most disturbing question followed naturally. The house hadn't been abandoned. It had simply finished choosing who to follow next. The decision to install cameras wasn't mine alone. By then, several neighbors were already afraid to sleep. We didn't expect proof-only reassurance that nothing was happening when no one was watching. The first nights showed nothing unusual. Empty rooms, still hallways, timestamps moving forward without interruption. Some people took that as comfort. Others said it felt deliberate, like something was waiting. On the fourth night, one camera activated without motion. The system flagged it as a glitch, but when we watched the footage, the audio picked up a low sound, steady, rhythmic, and unmistakably intentional. The sound wasn't footsteps. It wasn't breathing. It was closer to counting, slow, patient, as if marking time. Each pause was identical, as though whatever made it was measuring something precisely. Another camera captured movement, but not in frame. Shadows stretched along the wall, bending away from the light source. No object caused them. They moved independently, correcting themselves when they reached corners. The most disturbing clip came just before dawn. The front door camera showed the house's entrance opening slightly. No one entered, no one exited, but the door responded to something we couldn't see. At exactly 3:17 a.m., every camera lost signal for 12 seconds. When the feed returned, nothing had changed, except the timestamp, which skipped forward without explanation. Watching those recordings, I realized something unsettling. The cameras didn't capture a haunting. They recorded behavior, consistent, repeated, and controlled. Whatever was there knew exactly when it was being observed. That was the night we stopped using the cameras for comfort. From then on, we watched them the way you watch a warning, sign carefully, briefly, and never alone. Once the cameras were in place, the disappearances stopped feeling unrelated. People who had heard the voices, answered the door, or stayed too long near the house began vanishing quietly without struggle, without witnesses, without urgency. Police reports described them as voluntary disappearances, adults leaving town, teenagers running away. The paperwork was clean, too clean. No forced entry, no signs of distress, nothing that justified further questions. Families told a different story. Phones rang unanswered. Cars were left behind. Beds were still warm. One mother said her son had packed nothing, but the house felt emptier than it should have. A pattern emerged in the timelines. Each disappearance followed a night of unusual activity, voices on recordings, doors opening on their own, or cameras cutting out for exactly 12 seconds. One case refused to stay buried. A man was reported missing 3 blocks away. Security footage later showed him walking toward the street but stopping abruptly, as if responding to something calling from off-screen. He never entered the house. He never needed to. After that night, no one saw him again. The footage showed him standing still for nearly 4 minutes, then stepping backward, out of frame. Authorities closed the cases quietly. No press conferences. No warnings. Just reassignment of files and reassurances that there was no ongoing danger to the community. Listening to all this, I realized the disappearances weren't sudden. They were the final step. The house didn't take people by force, it let them leave behind everything else first. And once someone was gone, the street returned to normal. Lights on, cars moving, silence intact. As if nothing had happened and as if nothing ever would again. At some point, fear gives way to pattern recognition. I wasn't trying to explain the house anymore, I was trying to understand its rules. Because nothing this consistent survives without structure. Every account shared the same sequence. Attention came first, then familiarity, then invitation. People weren't taken suddenly. They were eased toward a decision they believed was their own. The house didn't behave like a predator. It behaved like a process, slow, repetitive, corrective, adjusting its approach each time someone resisted or hesitated. One theory began to fit too well. The house wasn't haunted, it was occupied. Not by a memory or a spirit, but by something that required permission before it could stay. The invitations weren't verbal, they were behavioral, listening, responding, speaking back. Each small interaction counted as consent, even if the person didn't realize they were giving it. That explained why resistance worked briefly. People who ignored the voices lasted longer, but those who acknowledged them, even once, became part of the pattern the house remembered. Another theory suggested the house itself wasn't the entity, it was the interface. A fixed point where something learned how humans think, hesitate, and eventually give in. That would explain why the activity never escalated into chaos. The goal wasn't destruction. It was continuation, ensuring someone else would always be next. The most disturbing realization came last. If the house required consent once, it no longer needed it again. Not after learning what consent looked like. That meant the house was no longer waiting for permission. It was simply waiting for proximity. I told myself I wasn't going in to confront anything. I framed it as documentation. Observation, one controlled entry, to confirm what I already suspected. But my body reacted long before my mind did. Standing on the porch, I felt the same pressure witnesses described. Not fear exactly, more like expectation. As if the house recognized the shape of me before I ever crossed the threshold. The door wasn't locked. It never had been. When I pushed it open, the sound it made felt rehearsedly, deliberate, almost courteous, like it wanted me to hear every inch of movement. Inside, the air felt wrong, not stale, not cold, just occupied. Every sound I made seemed to arrive somewhere else a second later, as if the house was deciding where to place it. I noticed the silence most when I stopped moving. No settling noises, no distant creaks. The house didn't breathe, it listened. And in that stillness, I became painfully aware of my own thoughts. Halfway down the hallway, I realized something else. I wasn't being watched from ahead or behind. The sensation came from within, like the house was aligning itself around me. When I reached the living room, I saw nothing unusual. No figures, no shadows. That absence felt intentional, as if whatever lived there didn't need to reveal itself anymore. That's when the sound started. Not from any room, but from the structure itself. A low vibration, matching the rhythm I'd heard on the recordings. Counting, patient, acknowledging my presence. I understood then why no one stayed long inside. The house didn't threaten, it waited. And the longer you remained, the harder it became to remember why you planned to leave. I left before it asked anything of me. Or maybe it already had. Even now, I'm not entirely sure which part of that decision was mine. After that night, I stopped walking past the house, not out of fear, but caution. Like avoiding a conversation you know will change you once it begins. Some places don't end when you leave them. The street returned to its routine. Cars passed, lights flicked on at dinner time. New families moved in, unaware of what had happened or unwilling to ask why certain houses were never discussed. Officially, nothing was wrong. No warnings were issued. No investigations reopened. The house remained legally occupied, even when no one was inside it for long. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear about it. A door opening on its own. A voice calling the wrong name. A feeling of recognition in places far from that street. What troubles me most is how familiar the stories sound. The details change, but the pattern doesn't. The same patience, the same waiting, the same invitation disguised as coincidence. I've wondered if the house was ever the point, or if it was simply where something learned how to stay without being noticed. Because if that's true, then tearing the house down wouldn't end anything. It would only force whatever learned there to find another way in. The most unsettling part isn't what I experienced inside. It's how icily life continued afterward. How quickly the silence settled back into place. If the house was waiting for permission once, it may not need it anymore. And if that's the case, the question isn't where it is now, but how many times it has already been invited in, without anyone realizing it.